You're listening to a podcast from The Word.
So, Dave, the piping hot topic that we're going to start with this week, piping hot by our standards, of course this refers to a film that was made in 1969 and recently rebooted, is that Peter Jackson has 6 more hours of footage of Get Back that he'd like to make available. And my question to you is, which I'm going to answer for you, is would we see it if it existed? Yes, we would. Would we learn any more about the Beatles than we learnt from watching the last 8 hours? I don't know. I mean, it'll just have to have a different story, won't it? A different narrative.
I will watch it once. You will watch it 10 times.
I will.
You will.
I watched the last one 3 times.
You simply can't get enough.
I know.
I think it can only be. It can only work if you edit it to have a point of view. Like these things always have a point of view. And the point of view in this case will be actually we were wrong about John Lennon being the leader of the Beatles. We were wrong about Paul McCartney being the leader of the Beatles. The true leader of the Beatles was George Harrison. That's what it'll do. It'll have to have a new thrust.
Because that was the gist of the last one, wasn't it? That McCartney is the beating creative heart and driving force of this group, the diplomat, the leader, etc.
Yeah. But you can take the same footage, as we've discovered with reality TV. You can take exactly the same footage, and you can, turn it into. You can turn characters into heroes or into villains. You can take the same material and give it a completely different spin. It's interesting, isn't it? I tell you, because we were talking about what's it called, Trainwreck, the Woodstock 99 film, and for years, successful films about rock festivals were all celebrations of what an enormous success it had been. I mean, the classic case being the original Woodstock, which for many people who were there was a nightmare. But
absolutely right. Yeah,
but the film was a celebration. This is fantastic. Everybody wants to go to a thing like this. And so that's how festival films work.
But you could argue that the Woodstock 99, Woodstock 99, in fact, the vast majority of people, an old mate of my eldest son's was there, and she said it was fantastic. It was really good fun. She said she left just before the whole place caught fire and the towers came down. But by the same token, you could be, you could have had a really fantastic time. Just that they chose not to pursue that, didn't they? That was the story.
It makes a better film to say that it was a catastrophe.
Yeah.
Because if you're sitting at home in your living room watching something on telly, you like to feel that it was a disaster, don't you? Really?
Yeah.
Because you weren't
so
stupid enough to
there.
go. Because
other people's suffering, so enjoyable.
We had a case of this last weekend because only on the last podcast we were talking about the plans announced to make future Reading and Leeds festivals green, didn't we?
Yeah.
There was a big initiative. So in future, the electricity would come off the national grid. There would be far less disruption of the environment or whatever. And so, we were talking about this last weekend, whenever we did, last Friday, I think it was. And then subsequently, the weekend was like a nightmare scene out of The In-Betweeners, wasn't it?
It was brilliant, but also it's classic journalism, because now Woodstock 99 is now a benchmark for appallingness, isn't it? And so the whole thing is so easy for headline writers to basically say, Reading the new Woodstock 99? The tents were on fire, arson, there was vandalism, there was theft,
So we were talking to our mate Keith Adsley when we did the quiz last night, and Keith is involved in a lot of charity work, and he said that he went with a team to the site of Reading. I think it was Reading, wasn't it? After the weekend.
Yeah.
After the weekend this week. And how many tents did he say they managed
I
to
thought
salvage?
It was 400, but
I think it was 400.
They rescued 400 tents. I mean, not tents that have been torched or wrecked, they've just been left there. You can buy a tent for kind of 28 quid or something.
You can buy a tent.
You shake them out the bag and they spring into shape, and then you kind of fall
Direct,
into
apparently,
that's right.
the main retailer of these. And so
they're taking 20. Was it 400 tents they're going to take out to
Calais, to refugees?
Brilliant.
It's just absolutely extraordinary. The scale of this.
I loved all the bleating on social media about that, saying, is it safe to go to Reading? What's happened? And when I used to go to festivals, I mean, I went to a festival in 1971 72, I think it was. She was policed by Hells Angels.
Yes.
And the Hells Angels had a massive bust up with local security, in which a lot of their Harley Davidsons were set on fire. A cornfield was set on fire. I can remember that Lincoln Festival, an entire field blazing. I can remember John Peel on stage saying, please refrain from starting fires because, in cornfields, because if you're arrested, we can't afford the bail, which we all thought was terribly funny. But I mean, that was just standard fare. That was just what it was like.
Yeah.
So I'm saying, toughen up and, get over it.
So
Part of fun. We thought it was hilarious.
So contrasting with these festivals is the interesting rise of the high ticket prestige residency.
Yeah.
Which I've been reading about in the last week. The likes of Harry Styles and Adele, obviously the great Las Vegas residency, which I think it's still to start, isn't it? 37 shows.
That's right. I know all the people. Las Vegas. I had a look at this. ZZ Top playing, Billy Idol, John Legend, Lionel Richie, Diana Ross, Rod Stewart, Usher, Pitbull. U2. It's not the kind of. It's not easy. It's not Mariah Carey.
It's not Vic Damone.
It's not
Tony Bennett. No, it's absolutely. It's Kid Rock. It's whatever.
Kid Rock, exactly.
Because it's those are the people who've got the money to to go to Vegas. Have a weekend in Vegas and a high ticket kind of show with a big name of your youth. In a very pleasant venue is a very appealing part of the package, I think I sent you a link to Duran playing the Encore Theatre in Las Vegas. And it was really interesting. It's very apparent straight away how much more comfortable that place is. The audience was... The audience weren't packed together as if they were in a traditional gig. They looked more like they were at a wedding reception or something like that. They were dancing freely at the front. And so bands like Duran are doing residences at these places. They're there this weekend because it's the Labor Day weekend in the United States. And it's the official end of the summer. But I see also they're returning for Halloween, Mark. You're going to like this. Because it says on the press release here that they've always loved Halloween because it's always been their favourite, and forgive me here, their favourite holiday. The Americans refer to Halloween as a holiday. In what?
Have you ever been in America during Halloween? They take it very seriously.
I know they do, but Mark, it is not a holiday, is it?
No.
Is it? People don't have the day off work.
No, I don't have the day off. No, I don't think they just
dress up. Okay, and so it's a big thing, as propagated by every American sitcom. Always have to have a Halloween episode, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And the rest of the world just sits there going, "Oh, have you finished with this for crying out loud?" Anyway,
children with small buckets made out of plastic buckets shaped like pumpkins.
So here, this is a contrast to your Reading or Leeds experience. Okay, this is what they say in the terms and conditions for Duran playing the Encore Theatre in Halloween. Okay, costumes, which obviously you're going to wear a costume. Costumes must not encroach on the seat or obstruct the view of other attendees. Must not be made to look like security or law enforcement, include weapons, brackets real or fake, of any kind, contain crude words, images or attire, or include detachable props or other elements. Any mask, hat, veil, face paint or other item that covers or obscures the wearer's face and possibly obscures their effective identification may only be worn inside the theatre after being screened and must be removed before exiting and cannot be worn outside the theatre, and so on. In what way does that resemble a holiday?
The Word Podcast. Prime cuts of popular culture served fresh each week.
And talking of movies, I was just looking at the various films that are under construction at the moment. Daniel Radcliffe playing Weird Al Yankovic.
That's a marriage made in...
It's bizarre, isn't it?
Made in an agent's office, that is, isn't it?
Extraordinary. Can that have... Does he mean anything outside the United States? I don't know. But anyway, Scorsese, I think, is making a Grateful Dead biopic for Apple TV+. with Jonah Hill from The Wolf of Wall Street as Jerry Garcia. Billy Joel
Oh, really?
biopic.
That's an actual
I
sort
think
of
that's
feature
happening.
film. Good grief.
Yeah, I think that's happening, which is a good idea, really good idea. I think there's a Billy Joel biopic called Piano Man in the works. Eddie Murphy is meant to be playing George Clinton. There's another reggae. There's another Bob Marley movie. There's a Bee Gees movie being made. Sam Taylor-Johnson is making an Amy Winehouse biopic. That's a good idea. Yeah. People are auditioning for a Madonna film. It made me think, who have they not made a biopic about who they should do? Because I've got one good idea.
Go on.
I think Nick Cave, I think Grace Jones, Joni Mitchell, John Martin, Judy Sill, I think would be really interesting. Rihanna. But
can I just point out one thing?
Yeah.
Judy Sill is a very good idea. Do you know why? Because people don't know who she is.
No, they don't.
Whereas...
And would love her if they discovered her.
No, but asking an actor to convince us that they're Joni Mitchell is an impossible ask. Because they're not. And we know who Joni Mitchell is. Whereas you could sell a Judy Sill biopic on the basis that you don't know who this person is.
Yes,
you could have an actor who looked like her, and you could make it work. Of course, problem is because she was never successful, you don't know who she is. Therefore, you probably wouldn't go and see the film. But anyway, anybody playing Joni Mitchell is on a hiding to nothing.
They are probably, yes. But I mean, you can argue though that various people have convinced us in the past that they were the people they were playing. I mean, I think the Elvis movie, I was kind of convinced to the end. I thought that was going to be an impossible ask, but it seemed to work. The Baz Luhrmann film.
So I think there's loads of greenfield sites here. The Atomic Rooster story. That's there's Brother Beyond.
Yes, Atomic Rooster.
There's all kinds of groups you could do like that, And who's to say that it won't happen eventually? Because nobody would have predicted 10 years ago that Martin Scorsese would be making a Grateful Dead film.
I know, which I'm, of course, very much looking forward to. I'll tell you my idea. My idea is Louis Armstrong, or indeed Louis Armstrong. As we now call him, don't we? Louis Armstrong. I think this is, in fact, I did look and somebody is supposedly, Tracy Morgan, who is in 30 Rock, supposedly trying to get money to start making one.
Tracy Morgan as Louis Armstrong is a good idea.
Yeah, really good.
Because he kind of looks like him.
Really looks like him. Yeah, amazing. He did. About a year ago, there was the notion that he was trying to get the funding to do it, and then it was COVID. Whether or not it's happening, I don't know. But I think this is a fantastic story for lots of reasons. One, this is such a significant figure in the history of, this is the first black musician really to kind of cross over on that major scale. Plus, his life. Let's remind ourselves of Louis Armstrong's life. Mother a prostitute, am I right?
Absolutely.
Born in a brothel, brought up partly by his gran very early on, rescued age 7 by a family of Lithuanian Jews who looked after him, sent to Borstal for firing a pistol.
Well, didn't he go to? Wasn't he go to the school for coloured waifs?
Yeah,
I think they called it.
That's
coloured
right.
Waifs in New Orleans.
Yeah,
couldn't have been a more unpromising start.
No, unbelievable. Then all sorts of problems with booze and drugs. Age 13, he married. He became a pimp at the age of 15, and he married Dave, a prostitute, when he was 17, and then this whole thing of coming into the major kind of white showbiz world, and the incredible success he had. I mean, that's an incredible story. Could there be a worse start?
I'm going to put this out there, as they say in the world of social media. Louis Armstrong, the most significant musician of the 20th century. There is simply no competition.
An interesting pop fact, Louis Armstrong, he invented the solo. He invented the solo. I mean, this is amazing, wasn't it? Because you were billed to go on, and you had the certain numbers you were going to play, and then they'd say, "Okay, you're doing a 45-minute set. We now want an hour and a quarter." And instead of doing new numbers, he had this idea that instead of each musician gets their 24 bars of reading off the charts, they would improvise.
Yeah.
And he began improvising, and that became the absolute staple of rock music. And the entire careers of various people were born from that.
Also, never, even in his later days, when he was massively famous all over the world, films and Hello Dolly and God knows what, he never moved from his old neighbourhood. He still lived, I think it was in Queens, New York. He continued to live in Queens. And you can see pictures of him in his later years, because he died, well, I think he was in his late 60s when he died. He's still sitting out there on the stoop, surrounded by the neighbourhood kids, because he never removed himself. He still continued to live the life he'd always lived. He was mad keen, crazily keen on tape recording. And so you used to record just everything that happened to him domestically. And there are yards and miles of tape of these domestic vignettes. You can go and visit his house, I think, nowadays. His old house.
What, of him just sitting in the kitchen talking to people?
Talking to his wife and talking to all kinds of people. Also, this is significant stuff, which the biopic which we're envisaging will undoubtedly make a lot of. He was very keen on laxatives. He had an advertising arrangement with the laxative company, didn't he? He did, called Crisco, I think.
Yeah.
And he said, and I think there is actually a print ad of him looking over his shoulder, smiling at the camera in a very distinctive Louis Armstrong way, where it says, Louis says, leave it all behind you.
Leave it all behind you, that's right. So good.
God bless him.
No, we were talking
and of course,
about...
I saw Louis Armstrong. I can't let this go without saying I am old enough to say I saw Louis Armstrong at the Batley Variety Club in 1966. I can't remember which of the two. When he did a 2-week residency at the Batley Variety Club, when it was the kind of the showbiz mecca, and it could get all these big names. It paid enough money to get these big names out of Vegas or out of retirement or wherever. And so I saw Louis Armstrong. He wasn't vintage Louis Armstrong, but it was Louis Armstrong.
It was him.
And he was about as far away from me as that window over there, which is quite something. But yes, I think Tracy Morgan and the Louis Armstrong biopic, a follow and win to that. I'm all in favour of that.
I'm in favour of that. And actually, when we were talking about unusual kind of upbringings, we were talking to Mickey Berenier of Lush on the podcast last week.
Yes.
Amazing story, with her mum and dad, just extraordinary. Her parents split up when she was very young, mostly brought up by her racist Hungarian grandmother, who gave her Coca-Cola and chocolate for supper. I mean, a really, really complicated life. Really well worth hearing, actually. I don't think that's up yet, actually. But it reminded me of another extraordinary upbringing, really, really difficult circumstances, which is Anni-Frid of Abba. I mean, do you know the story?
Well, there's a German soldier, wasn't there?
Yeah, her mum was a 19-year-old Norwegian. She's not Swedish. She's Norwegian. Mum was 19-year-old.
And the Swedes and the Norwegians, it's a very complicated relationship there.
Absolutely.
Particularly because of the war.
Her mum was 19, fraternised with a German sergeant in the Wehrmacht. If that's how you pronounce it.
Wehrmacht,
in the Wehrmacht. And they, obviously, at the end of the war, they had to leave the country for fear of persecution. She and her mum and her grandmum left for Sweden. She was told that her father had died on a ship that had sunk just at the very end of the war. Her mum died when she was 2. Of some kind of kidney failure. So she's brought up by her grandson. She's an orphan at the age of 2. It's absolutely astonishing. And then, in 1977, German Bravo magazine printed the story that, based on, I think, on her half-brother or whatever, who revealed that her father was still alive. and she then met up with her father for the first time, aged 32. That is a pretty incredible story, isn't it?
Cheers.
And, I don't think any kind of major psychologist would be required to tell you that she's always needed a sense of kind of security. And she is now, as you know, Princess Anni-Frid Rouse, the Dowager Countess of Plauen. So
Wow.
she's married extremely well. Not that she was, short of a few bob.
Yeah,
anyway.
go be short.
I know.
Short of a kroner or whatever.
I know. That's an extraordinary story.
Yes, is that the circumstances of her father still being alive? Is that the kind of thing that only comes out if you happen to be famous? Because what happens is journalists go digging after the details of your early life. Because the other classic case of this is, of course, Jack Nicholson.
Oh, it's amazing.
So Jack Nicholson grows up in New Jersey, doesn't he? And goes to Hollywood and Easy Rider and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and whatever. And I think wins the Oscar possibly. And then I think Time or one of the big news magazines is doing a big profile of him. And they
it was
do
time,
all
it was
that,
when he was promoting Chinatown.
when they're doing all their digging, and the journalist has to go to him to just, the convention is in the United States, you run all these things past the subject, and he's sitting there with a journalist who basically says, did you know that the woman you think is your mother was actually your sister, and that he was one of those classic cases of children who was born, out of wedlock, as the saying went in those days.
Other way around, no, it's the woman he thought was his sister was his mother.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
Yeah.
And that that he was born to a 17-year-old or something, and they were spirited away to give birth, and then the baby was presented as his grandmother's, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's
something
right.
like that.
Which is exactly what happened to Eric Clapton.
Eric Clapton, same.
Eric Clapton, I think he was about 18. I think Jack Nicholson was about 32 when he discovered. But Eric Clapton, I think, was about 18 when he found out that his mum was actually not his grand.
I mean, it's just it must rattle you, that kind of thing, mustn't it? So anyway, I don't know how we get from there to the subject, the 25th anniversary of the death of Diana, Princess of Wales, but we do. Which happened just the other day, didn't it?
We're recording on
25 years later.
Yeah.
Shall I tell you about how I heard the news? We were flying back with the family from a holiday in the United States of America, and we were flying overnight from, I can't remember what, New York probably, and we were in steerage, and our friends that we went with were in business class, and so one of them couldn't sleep or whatever, and so she was talking to the purser or whoever who had the news from the plane in front of them, who had the news from the plane in front of them, from the plane in front of them. That's how news communicates itself across the Atlantic in the middle of the night. That there had been a car crash, and that they were said to be badly injured, and so she then came back and told us. So we're sitting there in a darkened cabin with everybody asleep, hundreds of people in there asleep. Me and Alison going, good grief, that's extraordinary. And then, when it came the morning, they did that thing on the plane where they try and wake everybody up in time for the landing, to come around with the damp cloths or whatever. And so they lift they turn on the cabin lights, and they encourage people to just lift the window blinds. And you get that very strange, eerie light that you only get in a plane at that time.
Yeah.
And everybody is just kind of waking and looking rather the worse for wear and a bit headachy and whatever, and looking a bit sorry for themselves. And then at this point, the captain, who clearly, I've thought about this for the subsequent 25 years, just could not resist passing on this piece of news, came over the intercom, the PA or whatever.
I can sympathise with that.
And said, I I have to tell you, and then recounted the story. And so there's a cabin full of people who've just woken up. And so you're looking around everybody, and now we happen to have known for like 2 hours or something, but everybody else is just going, oh,
What? Yeah.
yeah, with these various stages of shock or surprise or kind of grief or whatever written over their faces. It was such a unique thing to see a piece of news being communicated to a load of people simultaneously. It's not something that you get to do very often.
No. I remember looking out, we heard very early in the morning, I remember looking out the window and seeing people walking past outside the house, and you could tell which ones knew and which ones didn't know.
Really?
Yeah, because the people who didn't know were having a normal conversation. They're on their way to school, and so have you done your maths? Well,
No, it wasn't Sunday morning, wasn't it? Sunday morning. Sure.
Maybe it was a Sunday morning, but you could just tell
Sunday
from the conversations.
Yeah.
You know, you could just tell. We took the kids to the funeral, which is about, I don't know, 3 or 4 miles from here, you know, and we went in on bicycles. I thought they've got to see this. I genuinely thought at the time this was going to be the beginning of the dissolution of the monarchy. I really did. I'd never forget it. I got the smell of the rotting flowers, the acres of rotting flowers in cellophane outside Kensington Palace. It was amazing. We went there. We climbed up a tree and watched the cortege go by. It was absolutely extraordinary, actually. But I was thinking about it the other day because I've just watched, in fact, we're going to talk to somebody who was part of the XFM lineup next week for podcast, our old pal Fraser Lewis. I've just watched the documentary Kick Out the Jams, the story of XFM. And that XFM, the small independent radio station that started in 1997, launched on the day Diana died.
What?
Gary Crowley
must have been
was
on
the
the
guy.
Monday. Oh, really? Was it?
Yeah.
Oh, right. Okay. Must have been on the
it
Monday
would have
after.
launched.
So
It
she
would
died
launch-
Saturday
the news
night,
came
didn't
out.
she?
The news came on the Sunday. It launched on the Monday morning.
Right, there you go.
And they had a big debate about whether or not they should delay the launch. I think the general feeling was, hey, you know, indie rock is a totally alternative thing. The kind of people who like indie rock, and they like, I don't know, Carter, and they like, you know, Blur, and they like Supergrass and Pulp. They're not going to be at all interested or affected by this. And how wrong they were.
How wrong they were.
had a marketing budget of, I think, about £250,000 to spend that week hammering home the launch of this. They said nobody took any notice at all. The whole country was just looking in a different
No, but
direction.
it's an interesting point, because radio, more than all media, is a question of habit.
Yeah.
Radio is a question of habit even more than that.
Yeah.
And so, what do you know everybody was doing that week? Is they were watching on telly, or they were just trying to keep up with what
trying to keep
was
up with the
happening.
news.
Now, even I
They
think
turned their radio off.
I think there was a piece in the Guardian the other day. I just saw the headline. I didn't read it, but it's because they were marking the fact that Radio 1, wasn't it, that week pretty much stopped their normal output and just played instrumental music, didn't they?
They did.
And so the likes of kind of, and because it was Radio 1, they didn't play kind of Mantovani or whatever. It was, so the likes of William Orbit and people like that did really well out of this. And there was a really popular format in that, in music that sounded contemporary but wasn't encumbered by vocals, encouraging you to be happy or anything like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was a unique week, wasn't it? Of course, then the following Saturday was the funeral, and which we only watched on the television. But I can remember seeing this cortege going up the Finchley Road, which is not that far from us, with people flinging flowers,
Oh, it's incredible. I can remember
the
car having to put the windscreen wipers on to clear the flowers so that the driver could see. And I can remember my father ringing up, who was watching on the telly.
Oh, God, yes!
Saying, I'm enjoying it very much, but then an awful fat man came on and played the piano and spoilt it for everyone. I was going, that's Elton John! Have some respect.
God bless you, Ronnie.
I know.
The Word Podcast. 2 cocoa tins and a piece of string.
So the passing of Drummie Zeb, the great drummer from Aswad, has just been announced. Wonderful drummer, extraordinary drummer.
Brilliant singer.
Yes. Are you familiar with the Aswad album Live and Direct?
I have it. I'm just going through the roof and I've dug up quite a few actually. I have a copy. It's a great record.
Just hold it up. Let people see it. Those who are fortunate enough, Patreon supporters who are fortunate enough to be watching this. Aswad Live and Direct.
Recorded at Notting Hill Carnival, I think, in 1983. Yeah.
It's such a great record. And it's as a consequence of that, of the way that they played. Not long after that, I was called upon to introduce them in a kind of whistle test special, which was to be filmed in, I think, the venue that there used to be the Nottingham Boat Club, where Led Zeppelin famously played back in 1971.
Yeah.
I think it's part of the student union, isn't it? Something like that. It's connected with Nottingham University. And
I can still remember how you introduced them.
Well, I'm going to do this because
Go on.
that is how the way these things used to be done. Is they used to have the band would start and they'd play so that they could get the levels right, the TV levels and the camera angles and whatever. And then the presenter would have to come on and pretend it was starting, basically, and have your introduction. And then if you were lucky, they went straight into the first number and it carried on from there. And I really liked Aswad, and I'd been playing Live and Direct a lot. And so at the appointed time, they did their number, and then the floor manager, whatever, waved me on, and so there I am. I got Aswad behind me on stage, and I got loads of students in front of me, entirely white, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, probably.
Anyway, and I said, "Ladies and gentlemen, harder than this, they do not come." Aswad. That's all I said, which I thought was quite a good line.
It's a really good
I'm
intro.
sorry, it's quite a good line, because most introductions to bands on stage are crap.
They're too long.
I'll die in a ditch over this. They are absolutely too long. That people have never thought about them at all.
Yeah.
They're wasted opportunities. So I did this. Harder than this, they do not come. Aswad. Raw! They go into the first number, and of course, telly isn't ready. Telly is never ready. Yeah. Oh, sorry, somebody went for a slash or whatever, or the
hair in the gate.
Hair in the gate or whatever.
Yeah.
So the floor manager had to go in front of Aswad and wave his arms, and they had to stop. And then there was a 5-minute hiatus. Then I had to go back on and introduce them.
Now, intensely self-conscious because you want to say the same thing, and the audience have already heard it.
And I think I did say the same thing. I think I had to do it 3 times.
I had the same thing with the undertones. I don't know, some technical fault. I had to introduce the undertones. And I did this. I stuck to what I'd originally got to say because I'd thought about it and I thought it worked. And you feel such a fool. Everyone's looking at you like you're a total fraud.
Yeah. Anyway, talking of on-stage introductions, can I just briefly recommend to people if they've got access to kind of streaming service and so forth, and I'm sure pretty much everybody has nowadays, you no longer have to buy a copy of Tim Buckley live at the Festival Hall. Is it the Festival Hall or Queen Elizabeth Hall? I can't remember. In late 60s. Anyway.
Oh, God, this is...
to go and listen...
Pete Drummond? No.
Pete Drummond.
Yeah!
To go and listen to the introduction to Tim Buckley, whatever that album is, live at the Festival Hall.
Yeah.
Please go and listen to it this morning. Just go and listen to it, because it starts with it's total silence apart from audience noise in the background, and then you hear Pete's footsteps, his Cuban heels or whatever, making their way, his desert boots, making their way across the cables towards the microphone, getting closer. And he goes, Pete Drummond, dear sweet man, but he
hasn't thought about it much.
Not snappy at all. He goes, oh yeah, hi, yeah. I was just taking my seat, and then somebody said, hey, would you introduce Tim? So yeah, here I am, and so it's just amazing. It's amazing to see him here. So I'm going to bring him out now. It's Tim Buckley. And you thought, what a wasted opportunity.
Utter, total waste of time.
And Tim Buckley kind of not ready, crowd not ready, you know. It's not teed up at all. Because, I think as Neil Tennant years ago pointed out, the best part of a music show is what? It's the beginning.
It's the start.
It's the start. And the audience wants to be teed up. The audience wants to go, yes, I'm here. Yes, they're here. You know, they want to relive that moment in their heads, don't they, when they go home? And if you just kind of mutter away, you rather lose it.
One of the best intros I ever saw, which was so sweet and so unassuming, was an old pal of mine called Peter Blegvad. You know, he's in Slap Happy and all that. And he was supporting Loudon Wainwright at the Union Chapel. And he's a sport act. And so he comes on stage, and he's very, barely known by most of Loudon Wainwright's crowd, as he's well aware. And he comes out on stage, he says, "Ladies and gentlemen, I'll introduce the support act, Peter Blegvad." And he walks off, and then he comes back on with the guitar and starts playing. I thought that was so funny.
That's a good thing.
It's really, really good. It's really good.
That's a good thing. Don't be afraid,
No, absolutely.
Because the audience, no matter who they are, they want to feel they're at an event. They want to feel that something happens that is in some way memorable.
Yeah.
They don't want to think. The audience never wants to think, "Oh, let's have no fuss." No, they've gone for the fuss.
Yeah.
The fuss is a huge part of it, Make people feel that they've come to something special. It's a huge part of their, their kind of value for money transaction.
Yeah. The intro on 5 Live Yardbirds was really good.
Oh, go on, what's that?
No, can you remember that one? No, I don't know if I can actually repeat it off the top. It's all about, welcome to the most yarmerizing. I can't remember. He just makes up a load of words about the yarmers.
Really?
Yeah,
who introduces them on 5 Live Yardbirds? It's not that guy Hamish Grimes, is it? Hamish Grimes was, and sorry, we're off on tangents. Listen, it's tangent upon tangent.
It is.
Get used to it, With the Hamish Grimes, I think I've got his surname correct. He passed away a couple of years ago. He was the original big Yardbird superfan, and was also the person who designed the Yardbirds logo. Which, we were talking about this some months ago.
We did it on the pod, yeah.
Some people, it's arguable, was the first proper band logo.
Yeah.
It was the first band logo that was used repeatedly on their albums. Not all the UK albums, but certainly a lot of the American ones, and was used on 5 Live Yardbirds.
Because the Beatles didn't have one of those.
They didn't.
Well, they just changed it, didn't they? I mean,
well, the Beatles had only the nearest thing to a logo the Beatles had was the thing on the drums, which was just painted by a guy from Ludwig, wasn't it? When Ringo picked up his free kit in 1964
that's right.
or whatever it was. So we shall no doubt come armed with even more facts of a Beatles nature next week, because we're going to a run through on Tuesday, aren't we, of Mark Lewison's upcoming 1962. Well, it's not a tour. He's doing these shows at the Bloomsbury.
But you and I are both big fans of the idea of formatting, and as in your wonderful book, Uncommon People, 40 different pop stars of 40 different years. And his format, which is a brilliant format, he's talking about the year 1962 and the Beatles. He's giving us 62 facts about the Beatles, each one 2 minutes long, in 2 halves of a show that each half is 62 minutes long. That's really good, isn't it? So that every 2 minutes you're going to get a different story.
No, it's a good thing.
You're going to get 62 of them. You know precisely what you're going to get, and you will love it.
We'll share one of them with you next week. We will. No more, Mark. It's all right. Fair enough.
The Word Podcast. Fix yourself a drink and it's like being in the pub.
It's another They Say It's Your Birthday special, and it's with an old pal of ours, a great supporter, valued supporter of the Word community, and a regular attendee at our Friday night quizzes. It's the wonderful Geltex, or Ian Haddingham. Geltex, lovely to see you. How are you? All right. And happy birthday, is it today?
It was just over a week ago.
Right.
Did you
How
do
did you
anything to
celebrate?
We went out for an excellent curry and some beer that evening.
Some beer. Good.
Some beer. And on Tuesday, we went to the Royal Albert Hall to see the public service broadcasting at the Proms.
Oh, right.
Which, of course, was excellent. It was a pop concert or music, modern music concert, but it had a set start time and a set finish time.
Listen, this is the great thing about the Proms.
We love it.
Listen, anybody who's never been to the Proms, go to the Proms. The Proms are a fantastic thing.
You know
can
exactly
get in.
what you're going to hear.
No, but you get all kinds of things. I've been to all kinds of proms, really odd things and really mainstream things. And it's just fantastic. You can see, you can hear, and you know when it's going to start.
And you're home in bed by 10.
Know when it's going to finish. No, but I've gone to late night proms which haven't finished early, but at least they told you when it was going to finish.
Yeah.
It's a civilized way to treat people, and I think it should be encouraged and it should be supported. So you've got a Stackwaddy game for us, Ian. Is that right?
Go on, far away.
I don't know if it's been done, but Prince's pseudonyms.
Oh, that's good.
So
good.
have we got one that isn't real?
We have one that isn't real.
Okay, run us through the
Oh,
list.
I like this. Go on.
Go on.
So you've got Madhouse.
Madhouse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Christopher Tracy.
Yes.
Tora.
Tora. All right.
Alexander Nevermind.
All right.
Love Symbol.
Love symbol. Yeah.
And Tora.
God. So
So
you've
you've
got
already
Tora
got Tora and Tora.
Yes.
Well, I know Christopher Tracy is real. I know Alexander Nevermind is real. Is that right? Am I right so far?
That is right.
I suspect that it's Love Symbol because that's too obvious. Because he was the symbol and he was the love sexy, etc., etc. I don't know.
All right, I'll go in with Mark. Love symbol. We're
Love
saying
Symbol's
love
the
symbol.
one I reckon is the ringer.
The ringer is Tora.
All right.
Okay,
Because
very
he
good.
was also Tora.
All right.
Oh, that's
On
great.
Tora, not enough.
No, right.
yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Well, that's very
Good
good.
for you. I like it. Very,
So
very good.
it's traditional on these
You win.
occasions when people are celebrating their birthdays that they throw a log on the fire of the word podcast discourse, or they ask a question or whatever. What have you got, Ian? What have you got?
Well, the one that I thought of, because both you gentlemen obviously were in the editing offices of major music publications. A friend of mine used to be a DJ on BFBS radio, and he was out in Germany. And in the mid-'80s, the Arista rep tried very hard to get his latest signing in the studio for an interview. For 2 weeks they tried, and my friend turned them down. And it turned out to be Whitney Houston's first...
And they couldn't
And
get
they
her
couldn't-
on the British Forces broadcasting system.
So the question is, has
Have we ever turned down anybody who turned?
Yeah.
Innumerable times. The classic case that they always used to talk about this at Smash Hits.
Is it the Spice Girls coming
But
in?
absolutely, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You spoiled my story.
Okay.
They they used to get, this was after Mark and I ceased being daily involved. Barry McElhenney, I think, was the editor at this point. And they used to get, up and coming pop groups that would be taken by their PR to just do a bit of an a cappella performance at the Smash Hits office. And they had a few of these. And then afterwards they said, no, that's enough. these girls turned up at reception. No, sorry, no time. It's press day. The Spice Girls.
They went to another of the
Went to Loaded.
magazines. Was it Loaded? I think
they
they
went
did
to-
perform at various ones. They went to
Top of the Pops magazine. They went to Top of the Pops magazine because I think I'm right in saying that the name Peter Lorraine, who was the editor of Top, is Peter Lorraine.
He's the guy who cooked up the
He's the guy who came up with the
nicknames.
names. He's the guy who came up with Sporty Spice,
Yeah.
Sporty Baby, and all that kind of thing. He obviously had more time on his hands to spend with people. But yeah, I would have thought the Aristocrat would have had no difficulty with Whitney Houston, just on the basic grounds of, look, you've got to see this woman. Would you like to be in the studio with this woman rather than who you could normally be interviewing at this time? You normally have no trouble with former supermodels, gorgeous
Well, maybe if they'd have explained her heritage, it may have worked.
Well, I don't know. Yeah, there's probably not a lot of point with the heritage.
Were we talking about Kate Bush the other day being on hospital radio? I think we were, weren't we? Wasn't she on?
She was on. No, I tell you what, she was on. She was on United Biscuit.
It was United Biscuits. Sorry, it was United Biscuits. That's right.
Because the UBN network, as it was called, was the radio station that used to broadcast the United Biscuits factories. Yeah. And loads of people who went on to be big names, I think Mike Reed or whatever, went on to be big DJs, used to get their start at the United Biscuits, where they would be broadcasting to people, knocking out custard creams. And so it was a legitimate place to take your newly signed pop star to give them a bit of experience of being interviewed on the radio.
Yeah, it was her first interview. I think.
It was Malcolm Hill took her.
Yeah, Malcolm Hill. But that's where we got it from, Malcolm Hill. That's right. But the brilliant thing was she did it. And
absolutely,
and that they kind of thought it was a good idea. Why not? Because you would hate to be the station that turned down Kate Bush in the early days.
But I suppose
Decca and the Beatles.
It's happened to everybody, hasn't it? I mean, it's funny. I mean, it's a bit of a tangent from British Forces Broadcasting, but it's slightly. You must have read Mark Lewison's first Beatles book, the whatever it's called, the first of his trilogy, and he writes about Tune In. And he writes about, at great length, about the difficulty of getting the Beatles' first single, Love Me Do, played on the radio. It was really hard to get it played because they didn't play many records on the radio in those days. And they had to be a certain kind of thing. And the big breakthrough was getting it played on three-way family favourites on Sunday lunchtime, which for those fortunate enough to be young enough who don't remember, used to be when... a lot of British soldiers in the 50s and 60s were still stationed overseas in Cyprus or Germany or whatever. And on Sunday lunchtime, they would be reunited with their relatives back in the UK, who would ask for records to be played for them, And they were, and they couldn't say where they were stationed. They always said they were at BFPO. Do you remember that? British Forces Post Office.
That's right.
Well, I was at BFPO 43.
Were you really? Were you an army brat?
Oh, heavens no. I had a brain. I was in the Air Force.
Oh, right. You were in the Air Force or your parents were in the Air Force?
I was in the Air Force.
Oh, right. Okay. So you were stationed where? Where was that?
Larbruck in Germany.
Oh, right. Okay. So you used to listen to Through Family Favourites?
I think it had died out by then, but it was mandatory listening when I was staying at my grandparents'.
But there you go.
All the time.
There you go.
What year are we talking about here, roughly?
It was all through the 70s that I remember.
Yeah. But I mean, there was one of the few places you could get a pop record played on the radio where it would be listened to by huge numbers of people. And so getting Love Me Do played once on Three-Way Family Favourites was a major a major turning point in its success. Well, look, Ian, very nice to talk to you. And
always a pleasure, gentlemen.
Always a pleasure. Never
anybody
a chore.
watching this who hasn't attended the Friday night quiz, because Geltex is there and a cornerstone of this setup.
Absolutely.
It's thoroughly recommended. It's very good fun.
It is. And can I just say
glittering prizes occasionally.
Can I just say thanks, gentlemen, for what you've done throughout the pestilence doing these broadcasts. It has been an absolute lifesaver. You should be honoured.
We're honoured. We're honoured by your presence, Ian. That's all.
Thank you very much, gentlemen.
That's all we need.
You're listening to the Word Podcast, where the time is whenever you want it to be.
So, any other business? We're joined by Alex Gold. Are you all right, Alex?
I'm all right. How are you guys?
Oh, fine.
We're
Alex,
in very chipper shape.
I want you to do something, Alex, afterwards, and I want everybody listening or watching this to do the same thing. Because I got a tweet from Mark Watkins, and he said he couldn't decide whether this was an April Fool or real. That there is a label called Sacred Bones in Brooklyn in the United States,
Right.
and Sacred Bones is in the kind of groovy reissue business, as you can imagine. There's labels. There is a label called Light in the Attic, isn't there? Have you noticed those kind of things? Our label can be dustier than yours. We can find more obscure things to reissue than you can. Because Sacred Bones claim to have made available hold on to your hat when I tell you this. The first 2 Townes Van Zandt records on 8-track.
This is so consistent.
On 8-track.
It's so consistent at the beginning of this podcast where we're talking about hot news stories relating to a movie that came out in 1969. So now we're talking about 8-track. It's back. See, what I can't understand about this, Dave, is, well, 2 things. One, was 8-track really that fantastic in terms of its sonic fidelity?
No.
I don't remember. We had a mate of mine at college had one in her car, and we used a great big box-like thing at the front.
Yeah.
We only had 2 8-tracks. One of which was
you only had
Waiting
room
for the
two.
Sun by the Doors, which we heard a million times. I don't remember. A, I don't remember it sounding very good. B, I remember it tangling and getting caught up and being cumbersome and useless. And the other thing is, if you bought the Townes Van Zandt 8-track, what do you play it on? Is somebody manufacturing new 8-track machines?
No, you've got to go and find some really old
Weltron 8-track player. You've got to go and buy one, haven't you? An old one. To play it on, it's absurd.
It is, but it's the fact that whether it's real or it's a very tongue-in-cheek, pastiche, it's kind of interesting that anybody bothers. You know what I mean? That anybody would even bother to make the joke is kind of funny, isn't it? And that somebody like Townes Van Zandt, who lived and died in almost total obscurity, is now sort of a hipster name, isn't he? Amongst a lot of people who weren't even born when he was around.
So it means you suggest that the whole project is cool. The whole thing is cool because it's Townes Van Zandt. So that's fine.
So what I want to know is, why can't the same thing? Why don't we have the same kind of celebration of the fact that it was 50 years ago this week since the release of Close to the Edge by Yes, which was... And I thought I would celebrate this extraordinary event by listening to it on the train yesterday morning. So I downloaded Close to the Edge in very high quality audio, and I listened to it on the train going on the kind of overground going over to northwest London where I was doing a recording. And I thought, you're sitting there with your little headphones on that train, which tends to be mainly patronised by young people. You think, I hope to God nobody knows.
Can you imagine if they had any idea what I was listening to? I'd be drummed. I'd be taken to the city limits and thrown out of town.
But it's quite an extraordinary thing. When you think this was a kind of #1 album, It came out in 1970.
Massively indulgent.
Well, yes, but you sort of have to take your hat off to them. That they did something that was so kind of against the prevailing wind. It's one of those pieces of music. It's only 3 tracks, and it's one of those pieces of music could never have existed in any shape or form without the LP record. It only exists for the LP record. It's a way. Why are you making this music? Well, because that will go on the first side, and those 2 will go on the second side, and that's it. You wouldn't invent it to play. You wouldn't invent it to put out on a single or anything. You just put it on an LP.
In fact, you would probably have thought we can't play more than 9 minutes on this because it won't fit on the record. So that's going to be the limiter. I'm sure it was probably that specific.
Well, it's always the way, isn't it? That you can never have the noisier stuff towards the end of the LP because the grooves get
Medal by
narrower.
Pink Floyd. There was only a certain amount of time that could last before it wasn't going to fit on a record. So
I'm sure that's true. So anyway, go on,
I've got
Alex.
this vision in my head, Dave, of you being approached on a train by a Ute. Oi, bruv, is Is that yes? You're listening to me, innit?
Yeah.
Yes, it is. Yeah, safe.
Yeah. Word.
Oh, that's fantastic. So what else is happening? What have we done in the last week? As we said earlier, we
We got Martin Ware. We
talked to Martin Ware.
We talked to really good.
Martin Ware out of the Human League and Heaven 17 and production fame and so forth. He's written a book called Electronically Yours, Volume 1.
Slightly tongue-in-cheek.
But he was very good, and I'm very pleased to say that we've done hundreds of these interviews over the last couple of years. And we're always trying to get people to tell us, and you can never ask them to do directly, is how much money do you get paid for this? And in this case, we asked him, and he told us.
Actually, we didn't even ask him. He just suddenly volunteered. We're not going to say what it was, but
no, we're not going to say what it was. You've got to watch the clip when he'll be appearing on YouTube in the next few days, I think. So that's Martin Ware.
Life-changing amount of cash.
Absolutely,
in one check.
particularly in the
mid-80s. In the 80s.
And then we're talking to our old mate Fraser Lurie in the next few days, who is now living in New Zealand. But we're going to talk to him about all kinds of things, including his time at XFM, because the XFM film is out now. What else is going on? Anything else we should mention, or is that it? That's it.
This podcast was brought to you by The Word.